Hi. Hi everyone. I hope you guys are doing well. Today, my brain is AFK and I wanted to forego music because it doesn't bring my brain enough stimulation to actually be able to do stuff. So we're just gonna listen to podcasts from OSP instead. And their Red's freaking trope talks podcast that she does every like week or something, and it's actually genuinely interesting, so it's not like it'd be like boring or anything. She just talks about like the movie tropes and like tropes and like TV shows and stuff, and how like they are like structured and all that. I think it's really interesting, and I'm not starting off from like the OG episode. Like I'm starting off from like I don't even know how long it's been a while since I actually like watched these videos, so it'll be a bit, but yes.
Why is writing girls difficult? This is a legit question, I swear.
Yippee.
More than half the population is girls, but it feels like there are only like 5 girl characters in existence. There's the mom, the damsel, the hardened badass, the sexy one, and the silly one. But if you look at the dude archetypes,
And today we'll be working on
Paragon, the big friendly guy, the smart guy, the dark misunderstanding.
Wait, hold on, let me see.
Gray
Can I
area,
find
the
their
teen
Twitter
dad, the
actually?
lancer, and
Let me
so
do
much
that so I can actually just pin their account.
This isn't meant to be accusatory in any way. I've honestly been trying to figure this out because I have so much trouble with this. The first piece of major writing I did—
Wake up, vgen, I need you.
She was pretty and demure and cried a lot and had healing powers. It was a disgrace, really. The thing is, when people notice this problem, the first solution tends to be to take a fully developed male character and turn him into a girl. Take the big guy, now he's girl. Smart guy, smart girl. And this can totally work. But sometimes you get weird translation errors where traits affiliated with the archetype clash with their gender. Like when you take a grizzled soldier badass and make him a her, there's a weird tendency for her to spout a bunch of cookie-cutter "don't be such a girl" stuff every other minute. Because of course, in fictional militaries, the overwhelming attitude is very classic macho. So when you fit a female character in there, you get a weird bit of character whiplash when her own machismo is expressed by calling unimpressive behavior womanly. Like, girl, own yourself. By the way, this character is pretty much what people are referring to half the time when they scornfully call someone a strong female character. The other half, they're talking about a Bayonetta type who's threateningly sexy, the "I'll kick your ass and look good while doing it" variety. Which is just a variant on the aforementioned sexy archetype. Actually, more specifically, it's a repurposing of a villainous female archetype.
We are working on
both sexy and
yeah, it is.
Take that archetype and turn it into a hero, but that's actually a new development. Since for a few
Wait,
centuries,
did it like
women weren't allowed to have sex drives, so of course
hello?
only evil women could be dangerously sexy. But anyway, there's another instance of that cookie-cutter gender swap thing where the translation error doesn't manifest in the character, but in the reception of the character.
That's so weird.
Well,
It's always interesting seeing different tropes. I like to see how they develop. Yeah, same. I just wish that it didn't like constantly like try and blur out. It's so weird.
I was complaining that Ray was an OP Mary Sue because when I saw that movie, it looked like a faithful recreation of episode 4.
Oh wait, here, let me fix that. I know how to fix it. I know how to fix it.
With a slightly different attitude.
Give me a sec.
The internet went berserk. Now, admittedly, the internet is in a constant state of going berserk over something or other, but this one kind of hurt because I
know how to fix it.
I liked her curiosity, her experimentation with her powers. One of the most complained about scenes when she manages to mind trick the
There we
guard
go.
was one of my favorites because it was obvious she'd
It
grown
opened up my tablet instead, so I didn't have to like keep worrying about it like minimizing and stuff, because I don't have it open on my screens. I have it open like in the background. I'm watching it through OBS as well.
But her confidence in the rapid growth of her powers flipped some
Okay,
switch
so
that Underboy fighter pilot chosen when Luke Skywalker hadn't. And we can argue about why all day long, but I'd rather not. Because fundamentally, I think the problem here isn't gender specific at all. I think it's just symptomatic of a much larger characterization problem. The root of the error, I think, is that writers oftentimes draw inspiration more from other stories than they do from reality. And it's a sad truth that up until a few decades ago, there were basically 4 or 5 girl characters. You got your fairy tale princesses, your moms, your femme fatale,
there we go.
your occasional Viking warrior woman. And the characters ended up getting recycled as a consequence of the fact that most writers are inspired to write by absorbing what other people write. The original error in girl characterization is, yes, rooted in centuries of dude-centric storytelling. But the reason why it propagated is, I'm pretty sure, this. And then within the past few decades, you suddenly
I already started working on the
started asking,
head turning a bit.
to be a dude. And that's how you got the cookie cutter gender swap stuff, which, by the way, was the
Which is
second approach
great.
toward female characters that
Now that I
I
think
ended up
about
writing
it.
into that world. I had a warrior prince I decided to add some estrogen to. Again, shamefully lax writing on my part, but in my defense, I was like 12. But I think this idea that we should write from archetypes is the root of the problem. Because if we were drawing characters from our lives instead, I'd say the vast majority of us have been exposed to all kinds of fascinating people of every gender. Archetypal writing is what leads to 500,000 identical heroes fighting the other 500,000 villains. There's nothing wrong with starting from other stories, but there are so many benefits to drawing from reality too. Now, I'm better at actually drawing than I am at writing, so let's use that as an analogy for a minute. Say you want to learn how to draw, which I heartily recommend. Say you start by drawing cartoon characters you like, or by getting one of those how to draw anime books and filling in the lines. You can get really good at that, but in the end you'll be making what is functionally someone else's art style. And if that art style doesn't cover how to draw, I don't know, dogs, how are you going to draw that dog you want to draw? Well, you can Google how to draw a dog and follow the instructions, but that'll get you how someone else would draw a dog. Do this with enough things and you end up with this weird Frankenstyle, where your art is a patchwork of other people's art. Sometimes the style discrepancy is very visible, especially when you have, for example, very stylized cartoon characters in front of incredibly detailed backgrounds, or very Disney-looking humans with more Looney Tunesy animals. But there's another way to learn art, and it's pretty much the only way to develop a unique style and guarantee that whatever you end up making, it'll be something nobody else could have made, unless of course they were imitating you. Obviously, it's life drawing, but more specifically, it's developing artist eyes. You sort of need to be able to look at the world and see in your head how you draw what you're seeing. Animators watch people moving and learn how to get across incredibly complex motion without compromising the simplicity of their visual style. Painters see swaths of color and contemplate the brush and palette knife tricks they'd use to recreate it. Graphic artists see light and shadow and learn how to get across a realistic human face with only a few blocks of black and white. And writers see the people around them and see the characters that their personalities...
How's the volume?
There are story characters that are so vivid and unique that you can practically hear the person who inspired their creation. Any given Terry Pratchett novel is full of them. A character inspired by life is going to feel so much realer than a character inspired by another character,
like,
no matter how good the original character
I had to make sure it wasn't like
is.
too loud in my headphones, but also want to make sure it's not too loud on stream.
If you want to do something new or take the character in a unique direction, you'll need to draw on your experiences from reality instead. So even though, statistically speaking, the vast majority of us know at least as many girls as guys, the tendency towards archetypal writing leads us to disregard these people when the time comes to design our characters. And though there's nothing wrong with drawing inspiration from the works of others, if you don't add any of your own observations or experiences, your character is going to be rote. But there is, I think, another element contributing to a certain amount of the trouble people have with writing girl characters specifically, and that's that in our culture, there are things that girls are supposed to be. The most obvious one of these is pretty. If you're not pretty, it's almost like you're doing something wrong. Now, this is why girl characters in almost any story are going to be traditionally attractive, regardless if
It's a little
species,
quiet, but
profession, or
overall
circumstance.
sounds good.
It feels like the
A little
norm.
bit quiet. Here, let me see.
Now, obviously, there are exceptions, but the mere fact that there are notable exceptions kind of reveals that there's a rule here. Now, I like pretty girls as much as anybody else, but we don't write characters we idealize all the time. Or at least we shouldn't, because that'd be kind of boring. There are other girls
Oh my
who
god,
face the
Burley! Thank you for the raid! Welcome,
character.
raiders! Hello, my name is Berlin. I'm a Starry Purple Ram, and I'm currently working on, a TV model, for somebody who asked if I could, like, help fix up their rigging, so, I'm doing that. How was your stream? Did you win?
Everywhere from the Matrix to the Lego
Sure,
Movie,
wait, let me
Lucas
shout you
Sinclair's
out as
strong
well.
female character with years of experience building on already
Everybody
outstanding
should
talent,
go
hangs
follow
back
Feather.
and
She's
down while
amazing. I
the training
freaking
stays
love
there,
her.
and it
She's
feels
one of my
natural.
model children's. And she was playing Valorant. You did you get to gold? Was it gold 3? I know that like it like ascends from like gold 1 to gold 3 in Val. I freaking forget all the time how their ranking system works compared to League.
There are a few more rules in place that are less rigid but still present. For example, girls aren't generally supposed to take up space, so their visual designs will tend towards compactness, either short or on significant occasions, tall but willowy. You end up with a lot of socially motivated traits.
Not yet, 14 are left. I wish you good luck. I'm sure you got this. You got this.
We know people or are people who aren't traditionally attractive.
Honestly, I'm really freaking excited for Clove. I want to play them.
Practicalities of maintaining a glamour routine on a daily basis, let alone while stuck on a desert island or an
Get
alien
food.
planet.
Get food.
We know this stuff, but because we're writing from other stories, all this cool real stuff doesn't get included, which is a shame, really.
Obtain thy food.
Think fast. How do you turn a plucky band of heroes into the underdogs? with an evil empire. Of
Enjoy
course.
lurking. Thank you again for the read.
They're not, and nothing says unheroic.
Yeah, apparently they're like non-binary, which I think is really cool, but like a lot of people like are mad about it for some reason.
Powerful and placed and with definitive leadership. Oh,
I don't understand people.
Because it serves as a foil to the heroes. The contrast between them shows.
But yeah, they go by they them pronouns. People keep deliberately calling them she her, which is annoying. She is so cute. She is, oh my god, they are so freaking cute. I love them so much. Wait, I want to draw them so badly.
Just to make your villain dangerous to the hero.
Yeah, they do.
I'll probably talk about this.
Freaking love butterflies and purple.
But for a quick discussion of one of the most classic examples of this, look
wait, if I wasn't already like dedicated to Omen, I would definitely play them. Well, no, I am gonna try and play them. If Omen gets picked, they'll just be my second pick. I don't care if there's two controllers on my team.
Intelligence to make big scary monsters for Superman to fight.
But that's not where he shines. Lex is at his most dangerous to Superman when he turns public opinion against him. And it doesn't sound like much, but when Lex makes the people think that Superman can't be trusted, there's nothing he can do about it. There's an example of that in the Justice League cartoon, where Lex basically tricks Superman into destroying a low-income housing development. Obviously, Superman had a reason to think he was doing the right thing, but
honestly, I don't know. That's a good question, because I was thinking about that too, because a lot of different languages have like the feminine and then masculine pronouns. And I feel like Clovis, they look pretty androgynous, like, but like they look like more femme presenting, so I'm sure they'll like find a way. I hope they do at least to preserve the fact that they're non-binary in different languages. But I'm sure they got it. I'm sure they'll figure it out. I mean, even if they don't, the fact that they even added them in the first place and made them non-binary is great to begin with. It's like a great start.
Like guerrilla warfare and clever tactics, or individual abilities, or whatever. Now, the evil
Riot
empire
games.
is especially useful because, unlike the lone villain, it seems monolithic and impossible to destroy. There's only so intimidating one guy can be, but an empire? That's huge. What can one guy, or rather one group of misfit heroes, do against something like that? Well, that's where the story tends to break down, because the answer is usually beat up the boss and win the day without regard to the actual consequences of a cultural collapse, or acknowledging the fact that if you beat up the boss, there's usually a line of succession set up to guarantee the empire persists even after the boss is taken down. There's a reason why fantasy novels will often include a rightful heir who can step in and fill the power vacuum when the other good guys finish playing Stomp the Tyrant. Now, the problem here is when you draw on reality, you end up with a situation that's less Prince Caspian and more Game of Thrones. When you break down an empire, you need another structure to take its place. Taking down the bad king and putting up a good one only works in stories, but is unsustainable in reality. You might end up with a benevolent dictator, but give it a few generations, the rulers will have forgotten why they bothered to be benevolent in the first place. So in the absence of a rightful heir storyline, a lot of the time the writer will just have the empire crumble when its leader is defeated. But the problem is when you overthrow a system, you need another one. A cursory glance
Oh, I'm working on a rig. Wait, hold on.
Who be in charge and how. See, stuff like this is why evil empire stories tend to stop before they have to address what happens in the aftermath. But this
I'm working on a model tune-up for someone. It should be pinned. I don't know if I ready to unpin it, but it should be pinned like their Twitter account and stuff. But their name is Clawmaster. Basically, they're like a dragon. So they have a lot, and I mean like a lot of toggles and stuff. And when I was first given the model, the body rigging was like very messy, so they asked me if I could fix it up for them. So that's exactly what I'm doing.
For literary efficiency. In the real world, there are no purely evil empires, no situation where all collateral damage is justified because all the bystanders were also evil, but fantasy and sci-fi love making entirely evil species.
I wish I could do something interesting with these wings.
In an easy to repair manner, so when their empire falls, the subsidiary good guy empires
probably
can normal, while the central bad guy empire collapses completely.
It's going pretty well. I mean, like the model setup is like very messy, so it's a bit stressful. No, I'm not playing the video on 2x speed. That's just how she talks. She talks really fast.
1v1 fight between the mainest hero and the big bad boss. You need an army to fight an
army. Or maybe I am.
Why your heroes will generally either join with or start a resistance movement, or failing that, strike up an alliance with a friendly empire and take care of their personal vendettas while the allied army does all the legwork. Now, the most important aspect of the evil empire is the evil emperor.
You can tell it slowed down a little bit now.
Will be heavily determined by the nature of its dictator. Now there are
Is that
4
better,
main
though?
kinds, so let's take a look at them. This obviously isn't an exhaustive list, but it is a broad categorization that I find works pretty well. The first kind is the Emperor with an agenda. This particular bad guy is notable in that he doesn't micromanage the workings of his empire. Usually he's content to pursue his own dark objectives.
It was fine,
evil
was it?
sorcery or living forever.
I
Sure,
know
he's doing
that
bad
she
stuff,
speaks really
but he doesn't
fast.
tend to concern himself with the personal scale workings of his empire.
Didn't mind, I was
Next
just
is
surprised at how
Emperor's
fast she was
because
talking.
they've
Okay.
managed to attract his attention.
Well, if anybody has any problems with how fast she's talking and if you're trying to pay attention to like what she's saying, let me know. I'll just put it to the 0.75 speed. It has like a bit of like a weird like,
control over his empire is at least somewhat supernatural.
what's the word?
Sometimes that means he's also the only thing holding the infrastructure together, and without him the
I
empire.
don't know what the word is. It sounds a bit wonky, but it's her speaking is like slower than.
Much influence on the inner workings of his empire beyond the occasional gladiatorial arena, mostly because there's likely to be 14 layers of bureaucracy between him and the actual civilians. This emperor is a man-child. He does what he wants, indulges whatever villainous ideas he has, and basically just takes advantage of his absolute power. He's very dangerous on a personal scale because he has no constraints and no sense of propriety, and this is why he's generally not really in charge. His bureaucracy is more likely to be made up of overly ambitious people trying to manipulate the
Yeah,
system.
captions should help.
But the Emperor just tends towards some good old-fashioned chaotic evil. Taking this guy down won't do anything to the structural integrity of the Empire, but putting a rightful heir in his place could possibly set things on the right course once they scrub out the bureaucracy a little. The third kind is the Maniac. He's completely chaotic, ruling entirely through fear. Do something wrong, he'll have you executed. Look at him funny, he might have you executed. This bad guy is bad news because he keeps his entire empire
There we
on edge at
go.
all times. No slight is too small for this guy to take it out on you. The good news is, there is almost inevitably a rebellion brewing with a well-thought-out plan to assassinate him, possibly even orchestrated by his own government. The bad news is, this guy probably really likes making examples out of people, so your heroes will probably have to stop at least one public execution. Fortunately, there is no way killing this guy will make the people's situation any worse, so feel free to have your characters throw out some justified regicide without worrying too much about his citizens. Related to option 3 is option 4, the Grumpy Usurper. This is the guy who probably murdered his way up the line of succession and or got the rightful heir, a character who's practically inevitable in this scenario, exiled in order to make way for his ascension. This guy is almost inevitably a terrible king because he's too spiteful and petty to prioritize the big picture. Worst comes to worst, he'll evolve into option 3 as a way of coping with his insecurities about not being the proper heir or a proper ruler. This guy's convenient because his story comes preloaded with the walking solution, the rightful heir. Insert rightful heir A into throne B and you're basically done. Now as for evil empresses, that is specifically female rulers, because these options could all technically be unisex, there are 2, and they're basically hot and cold. Cold is the Ice Queen. She is ruthless, heartless, and likely to order torture or execution without a second thought. Now, whether or not she's a good ruler is completely arbitrary. Sometimes she restricts her cruelty to enemies of her empire, sometimes it extends into a passionless ruthlessness towards her own people. You're about 50-50 on that one. Hot is basically the female variant of option 3 with an added dose of villainous perviness. This one is gleefully cruel and probably runs some sort of slave-based empire. She also might try to make at least one of the heroes her consort. Oh, and either of these options could also be a daddy's villain if her father was similarly evil. Each of these emperor
Queen of
archetypes come
Hearts.
with their own
Up
matching
with their
empire and personalized
heads.
problems that arise when they're taken down. So what kind of emperor you use is probably informed by what kind of heroes you're throwing at him. But regardless, the sheer variety of bad guy emperors definitely show how freaking common this trope is, and why. There are so many stories that can only easily be told in the context of an evil empire. If you want your heroes desperate and on the run, this is an easy way to do it. If you want a daring and sneaky rescue mission, same deal. If you're partial to exiled royalty, one of these probably sprang up in their absence. Basically, this trope
I don't know
appeals
if
so
y'all
often
can
because
tell
it's
how-
useful and can be developed
Because
into
the
a
body
solid
is slowly just
device.
disappearing.
So, yeah.
It wasn't really
Hey,
keep it in a
please
great
write what you
state.
know, I mean, because I don't know what it's like to be a dude, and dudes generally don't know what it's like to be girls, but we write people who aren't us all the time. So when people say that, what are they actually talking about?
where's
Alright, here's
breathing?
the thing. Real quick. Writing and acting, they're kind of the same thing. So because I'm better at acting than writing, let's use that as an analogy.
Wait,
for a
actually,
minute.
where
You
did
can't act
breathing
something
go?
you don't know. You gotta draw on your life
Confused.
experiences and use them to portray your character's experiences. For an example, when Scott McNeil needed to portray the trauma of his
Oh
character
no, I
Dallas when
lost
his building
it.
gets blown up, as seen here,
Where'd it go?
he drew on the similar experience of his
Breakfast.
wife accidentally backing her sedan over his motorcycle.
This.
I feel you, bro. Point is, you can map your existing experiences to more alien ones. Few of us have had their personal giant robots blown up in front of them, but most of us have had important things broken in the past, and the feeling is much the same. Personal anecdote time. Last year I attended a voice acting panel thing run by David Vincent. He played this guy. And among other things, a few of us got to try our hand at doing a little onstage reacting to hypothetical situations, including death scenes. Now, none of us had died before, but the more interesting voice stuff was before the dying, so that wasn't really a problem. I got challenged to provide the voice of someone who just got splashed with acid, set on fire, and then fell out a window. Now, I hadn't technically
Hi,
about any of those things,
Shokora. How
except
are
for
you
the fire part.
doing?
Pro tip, super glue and cotton don't mix. But it wasn't too hard to imagine getting hit with something and rapidly realizing I needed to get it off me immediately, think spider falling on your face, and the falling out of a window part. I mean, I'd tripped over stuff and I'd jumped off of high places before. Combining the two emotions wasn't that hard. And it was pretty fun. So in acting, you kind of build up
It's
a
going
repertoire of
pretty
things you
well. I
understand
just
and can
ate
recreate.
food.
Fill
I
in the
had
blanks with your imagination
pierogies,
and do your best. Now, the
drink
trick is, in
water,
writing, write
and
what
right
you
now
know
we're
is
listening
this.
to
It doesn't mean only write what you
Trope
lived
Talks
through.
by
It means draw on
OST.
what you understand to make your story. You might not know what it's like to be a half-selkie college student, but you
How
might
about
know what it's
your?
like to
Oh
be
wait, I
torn
already
between two
asked you. It
cultural
didn't
heritages and
die.
live in two families that never interact. You're probably
That's
not highly trained
that's what
assassin
sparked it.
questioning
Hurry
your
asked.
career, but the odds are good that you've done unpleasant or boring work out of habit while mentally
If you
distancing
like
yourself from your situation.
listen,
But
like
there
if
are,
you like
know,
watching
limits. If you're
videos
writing a job with
on
background that hasn't really existed in
like
reality, you can play
history
around.
and
But if you
like
are writing from reality, it's harder to
myths
justify
and
doing
stuff
that.
and
If you have no
like
background in science, writing a science fiction
what's
story is liable to be
like the
difficult.
gods
If
of
you're
like
not familiar with
different
certain
cultures and
cultures, you might
stuff.
not wanna write a story
Should
set
definitely
in
check
that
them
culture without doing
out.
your
They
research.
make a lot
So
of
let's talk
interesting
about doing your
videos on
research,
that
because
stuff.
the cool thing about writing what you know is that you can always know more. One of the many
It's always
values of writing,
entertaining.
and that is how easy it is to learn stuff through it. Not only that, you also get personal anecdotes from people from all over the place with all kinds of backgrounds. If you have no idea what it's like to be adjective in place, you can find someone and ask. Or, like, if you've never had a certain job, you can find accounts from people who have worked that job. I am 100% not a Redditor, but I'll routinely scroll through Ask Reddit because the sheer volume of life experiences there is amazing and super useful when you're writing or world building. And on the more scientific end of things, you can self-teach to a certain degree, but you can also ask people who do this stuff for a living. Another personal anecdote for you. In a sci-fi
On
review I was working on, I
radioactivity.
decided I wanted to make
Radioactivity is
genetically engineered photosynthesis
interesting.
Now,
I don't.
obviously, I don't know anything about genetic engineering, so I decided to handwave the specifics of the genetic modification.
Wait, like what was it about? Like radioactivity? Like what was it like discussing about it?
I wanted to know how well this character could function in a low oxygen environment, because that was potentially plot relevant. So I looked up how much oxygen a square inch of photosynthesizing plant life could produce. I approximated the surface area of the average human with a little help from Google, and I looked up how much oxygen the average human consumes in an hour.
It was very
Finding that in order to
interesting.
make it work, I need
I
to
mean,
increase the
yeah, I
efficiency
would
of
say
the
that
photosynthesis by a factor of
radioactive
24,
things are like
photosynthesis
actually
would
fairly
get all the
interesting
oxygen they
because
needed if they allowed
like
their entire surface area to
hold
be
on.
exposed to sunlight. But this was fine because I could handwave that too. So
Because think about it, it's a natural thing. Like, you wouldn't think it is, but it actually is. And I think that's wild because, like, it doesn't feel like it would be. I don't understand it. Like, I would like you should like share the video. I want to learn more about radioactivity. You should share the video. Because it's like an interesting topic, but I don't know enough about the topic to like form like a big opinion on it, but I do know it doesn't feel like it would be natural, but it is natural, so it's confusing. It was a video about the White House naturally of Los, wait, was it Los Alamos? Oh, wait, I'm gonna look that up. And I'll save it for later. I'll watch it later and I'll let you know what I think. 'Cause like, interesting, yes. Yes, fairly interesting. Was it the first result? Was it the radioactive autopsy?
So that was okay, until I remembered that photosynthesis also produces glucose. So I looked up how many molecules of glucose are produced per molecule of oxygen during
Okay,
photosynthesis.
I'm gonna watch it later.
To the amount the human body used in an hour, and ended up discovering that photosynthesis produces
I'm watching a lot of Fear and Hunger videos,
glucose as the human body can
actually.
consume. That's obviously bad, but also interesting. It meant I needed to figure out a way for these photosynthetic people to sequester or expel excess glucose and therefore avoid the curse of space diabetes. It'd have been easy to just say, he photosynthesizes, shine a sun lamp in his room, but this produced a much more in-depth story element and one that feels more real. And I had no idea about any of this stuff when I started. I mean, the last time I took a chem class was high school, and I didn't do very well. But I can multiply like a champ, and my Googling skills are second to none, so it wasn't too hard to scrape together enough actual science to construct a viable thing. Not real life viable, but magic space future viable. Yeah, you know what I mean. Point is, it's better to do the research than it is to assume you know enough about what you're talking about. So instead of write what you know, it should really be know what you write. But But
Thank you for
all
sharing
good
care
things
package,
these
Keaton.
days,
I hope
there is
you're well.
controversy here. See, when you're writing characters, it pays to include realistic levels of diversity. Or unrealistic levels, who cares? Making all your characters the same is a risky endeavor because it's kind of going to be boring no matter what you do. But here's the problem. You can't be all those people. You can't have a background beyond the one you have. So how do you reconcile including a diverse menagerie of characters with the fact that you can't be writing what you know in the process? Well, there are a few schools of thought. The first option is
Kyle
to not
Hill,
include
he has
diversity,
some.
just in case you offend someone. This is a response to the second
He
option.
has
where to add
some
diversity,
videos
you
on these
include,
topics. I'm gonna
stereotypes.
hold on. Wait,
Unsurprisingly, neither of these
I'm
really
gonna
reap
mark
the
that
benefits of
too.
writing
I'll mark that
diversity
down
with
too.
character backgrounds, and neither is ideal. The third option is to include diversity, but to never address it. So, like, write a black character, but never really discuss the effects her being black has on her life. Write in a gay character, but don't really comment on it. This is a safe option, kind of. In fact, it's got its own problems, because although you're reskinning these characters to fit into a minority, you're not exploring
Thank
the actual
you.
consequences of being a member
Now
of that minority.
I freaking love hearing about the demon core because like it's just such an interesting thing that just like exists. Scary. It's really scary.
An example of this is the
I've been watching a couple videos about the demon core.
But you don't really want to specify.
I just realized that the chat broke again. Give me a sec.
Now, option 4 is research. You want to include a character from a certain group, you talk to people from that group. Again, this is writing what you know by expanding what you know, and this one's done less because it's frankly way harder to get right. But again, the internet makes it easier. There's an unprecedented level of communication where you can just see into someone else's life. It's not going to be perfect, and it's not going to be as in-depth as if you were that person living their life, but it's probably better than nothing. Now, the controversy here is which of these options is better. Most people agree that 2 is pretty terrible, but between 1, 3, and 4, it's a closer race. 1 is basically
I'm gonna look into
them
them so that I could like see like the videos and stuff.
Some of the most realistically diverse stories, but the typical counter-argument is that it runs the risk of appropriation
Based off a recommendation.
yours to tell. 3 is kind of an attempt to
Too
strike
high.
a happy medium, but as a result gets blasted for not doing enough in either direction. And where do I stand in all of this? I try to avoid this problem, because I don't have a solution. There's a reason why most of the time I write fantasy or far future sci-fi, because in those cases I can construct all parties involved. It's not a question of being uneducated on real elements, because there's next to no input from our reality. But if I had to pick, I'd probably try for option 4. Whatever, it's not my call. It's just good to understand that there actually is controversy around this subject. But so far we've talked about characters and settings. To make a story, you also need a plot. So what does writing mean in the context of a plot?
I like videos like that.
Turns out. See, when you break it down, most stories map to things
Because my
almost
brain
everyone
is small.
experienced. You get friendships and betrayals, romances or lack thereof, pinning all your hopes on
Well, not
someone
my
who
brain is small,
disappointed
more
you,
like
all kinds of stuff. In fact,
I
the
process
idea that you
things
wouldn't understand a story is
slowly.
almost alien, because there are universal experiences.
So
most stories
I
are
just
built
kind of
on.
like,
It's not
huh.
a problem, really. Well,
Okay,
the
now I
problem is
understand.
sometimes they write what they know too well, and as much as I love tropes, you can't build a story out of them. Look, we all grow up with entertainment. We see or read stories, and we learn.
I'll definitely check out a few.
So when the time comes for us to write a story, a lot of the time
I'll let you
we
guys
write
know what I
stories
think
we already know.
afterwards.
And that's the problem. It's like you're writing a book with autocomplete turned on. Look, tropes aren't bad. Tropes just happen. If you're writing a story, familiar things are going to show up. But there's a difference between recognizing tropes and building with them. The hero archetype just happened, but if you're writing a hero, he's going to be way
we'll see.
blander than any of the original hero archetypes. And yeah, it's going to be a he. Here, I'll give you an example. There's this series I read when I was a kid called The Belgariad, and it's well written, and I've got a soft spot for generic fantasy, so I liked it, but the main character, Garion, is the most generic instance of the hero archetype I've ever seen. You can literally check off all the instances of his hero's journey without fail. Now, this is pretty clearly the result of building from tropes, and the end result is that Garion is by far the least interesting part of the Belgariad. This is the hero you write when you think, I know how heroes work, they have these characteristics and do these things. And that's not memorable. But if you want to look at a character who fits the hero archetype while still managing to be vastly entertaining, I wish to draw your attention to YA protagonist Percy Jackson. I've complained about those books before, but I have no complaints about their hero. Percy is one of the most entertaining protagonists I've ever read, but his heroism isn't what makes him interesting. It's the constant state of
this
near
is pretty
disorientation that makes him
decent.
fun. He does
I don't
heroic
think I need to
things,
get
but
rid
the
of
first-person
that.
perspective helps us see how screamingly unprepared he is when he does those things. Percy wasn't written to be a hero, he was written to be a teenager.
Do y'all
in
ever
over
just
his
like get
head.
like
And it's
those like
great.
bursts of
And
just
that's
like watching
the
like
hero
like a
archetype
singular
appeared within his
YouTuber,
character, but it's not what
and
he
then
is.
like
Reared
2
wrote
weeks
Percy
later you're
as
like,
no one
okay,
dislikes
I'm not gonna watch you
what he
anymore.
knows
You just like
from
don't
his
watch their
own
videos
stuff. He
ever
wrote what he knew
again.
from life, not what he knew from stories, and that produced better stories. So yeah, writing what you know.
Alright, what the is a Mary Sue?
Seriously, the term gets thrown around all over the goddamn place, but what does it mean? Nobody can agree. Some people say a Mary Sue is any character who's unrealistically heroic and or powerful, but that definition also covers basically every hero.
Hold on, wait,
so
I need to find my
clearly it's
nail
too broad.
file.
Some
There's
might
like
be
a
restricted to author inserts,
weird
but there's nothing
thing on my
stopping
nail.
White
It's like a
from writing
serrated
countless other
knife,
authoritative
except
stories.
not sharp.
Iconic hero Luke Skywalker has been explicitly confirmed to be heavily based on George Lucas
Pain.
himself, if this didn't already give it away. Mark Hamill has even gone on record to say that when he was stumped on how to play a scene, he just default to whatever Lucas would do, and Lucas would love it. But obviously, I mean, Luke is kind of a whiny twerp. It runs in the Skywalker family, but he doesn't feel like a Mary Sue. I mean, to me, I also liked Rey, so maybe my judgment on Star Wars protagonists shouldn't be treated as unbiased, but still, it seems like any established definition ropes in too many characters.
You have to stop yourself? Wait, why do you stop yourself?
Mystery of the Mary Sue. Who is she? Well, we should probably
Honestly, I do that as like background noise because like
travel all the way back to 1973.
when I was younger,
parody slash dissection of this trope in its original form. She was a comically over the top.
it was like Mr. Rollin. I used to watch SS Sniper Wolf when I was little. What else? What else?
Youngest lieutenant in the fleet, only 15 and a half years old. Captain Kirk came up to her.
Frick, who else? I can't remember their names. I like binge watched Markiplier for like a hot second. And like never watched him again afterwards. He's still like a character I still watch like every so often, but yeah.
See, at the time, this was a lot of what fanfiction was. People wanted to ride along with all these wacky adventures, which, you know, fair. So they drop a character into the world and wish fulfill the hell out.
I mean, yeah, Mr. Rollins, like his stories are interesting.
She's better than everyone at what they do, but nobody's mad about it because she's just so amazing. But none of that.
Like after I binge watched like all of his like
the story is empty. This version of Mary Sue takes the spotlight.
This video, watch the interesting video 4 hours later. No, but where did my time gone? Where did my time go? I had to go to sleep.
Be her because the story is entirely centered on people.
Yeah, I like Markiplier too. He's just like so entertaining to watch. I like his scary gameplay videos.
She's a fanfic character. People write fanfic for fun, and if your first original character happens to be you with better hair, then whatever, man, you do you. But Gen 1 Mary Sue understandably got a lot of backlash. She was accused of being too perfect, too flawless, too good, of stealing the spotlight from the real heroes, which are all understandable complaints. But this gave rise to the second generation of Mary Sues, where some
then stopped. Yeah, I don't sub to YouTube channels for that specific reason, because I'll have like a burst just like binge watching their videos, and after a while I'll be like, never mind, I don't want to watch them anymore, and I just like leave.
This one can't be a Mary Sue because he's the villain. This one's not an original character, they're repurposed from the original source material, so they can't possibly be a Mary Sue. Now this gave rise to the substrains of Jerk Sue, Villain Sue, and Possession Sue respectively, all attempts to subvert the image of the Mary Sue without removing the fundamental Sue-ness. The Jerk Sue would be a colossal dickhead, but everyone they cared about would love them anyway. The Possession Sue would basically rewrite an existing character to match with what the author wanted them to be, often pulling them pretty far out of character in the process. The Villain Sue was actually pretty easy to get away with, because villains are already often over the top, cooler than the heroes, and crazy flamboyant, not to mention just plain fun to play.
I like
now, there are a ton
villains.
of other Gen 2 strains, but they all have one thing in common. The story still only exists.
Yeah, that is exactly why I don't sub the things anymore.
The story boring around
It gets
them. The story
annoying.
with a Sue at its core is written as though the Sue is the center of the universe. We're supposed to accept at face value that they're the most interesting, most important character in the story, because that's the starting point of their character, not their backstory, not their motivation, just how invested we're supposed to be. And I think fundamentally that's what makes a Sue a Sue. It's not something that exists on the level of a character trait, but on the story level. It's how the plot flows around them. The error is that the author starts from the premise that this character is by default the best character. Not the most paragon, not the most powerful, but the best. The one everyone sees themselves in. Or at the very least, the one everyone wants to pay attention to. And that's the problem. When you start from that premise, you forget to write the character in a way that draws us in. When you start with the idea that of course the character is the center of attention, we, the audience, will never actually internalize why they should be the center of attention. It's writing with a blind spot, and that blind spot isn't going to be filled, and that pulls us out of the story. And this is the problem that transcends fanfic and starts to enter the world of original writing. Anytime the writer is too busy squeeing over a character to establish why we should care about them, it ends up feeling a little too self-congratulatory. But the problem doesn't stop there. The Mary Sue distorts the world around them, changing the way characters
What
act and
happened
how
right
it works
here?
together.
Why is it like
The Mary
this?
Sue is the center of attention at the expense of basically everything else. And this isn't always positive.
Pixie, thank you for the raid. Welcome, raiders. Hello. Give me a second. Let me fix this real quick. Okay. Pixie raid. Shout out.
compelling read, no matter how interesting her character is. And it's usually not that interesting. It takes more than a cartoonishly traumatic backstory.
How was your stream? What did you do?
Character compelling. Now, to be clear, there are stories with a character at their center where the character isn't a Mary
I
Sue.
just recently went to back to watching him with Iron Lung.
Glorifying the Sue is prioritized over maintaining the established
And his Chernobyl liquidators, which led me to watching Kyle Hill because this is a true story.
Han's the one overcoming his personal demons and swooping in to save the kid's life.
They had to do in his rabbit hole watching Kyle's videos. Okay, valid. Falling into the rabbit hole is huge. We played Splatoon 3. My brain was exploding in the end. How was Splatoon 3? I've never actually played Splatoon in my life.
A Mary Sue's not a character. They're an artifact.
You couldn't keep playing? Wait, why? Was it just like people like you were playing with, or what?
You can't have compelling characters and side stories in a world that's all about Mary Sue. And that's what Mary Sue is. Not just the center of the universe, but the only real thing in the universe. Everything has to lead back to the Sue.
It's
in
fun.
a situation where that's not true, you don't have a Mary Sue. You might have an
You're doing the story mode. I didn't know there was a story mode for Splatoon.
The story is sacrificed to make the character look good. A character in a good, well-rounded story where there's focus put on other characters and character interactions that don't center on them can't be a Mary Sue. The worst they can be is poorly written. And I would be remiss as an internet content creator if I didn't address the gender thing. The fact of the matter is, the brand of Mary Sue is a female trope. She started as a poorly written self-insert, mostly used by beginner female fanfic writers, and blossomed into 1,000 recolored variants of a poorly written self-insert used by a wider array of fanfic writers. But Mary Sue characters are not exclusively female, and not all female heroes are Mary Sues. The thing is, there's a toxicity in the ease with which female characters can be demonized as Mary Sues for expressing protagonisty traits like being unusually skilled or saving the day. It's the same thing that happened with Gen 1 Mary Sue. People looked at the character traits the Sues were given and decided
the colors are
made
obnoxious.
her a Mary Sue, rather than the more writing that surrounded her.
Wait, you mean like the colors they used?
And most of their author avatars were female. This trope became a female character archetype. Traits that
I'm not gonna lie, I've like literally never seen Splatoon gameplay in my life.
As a Mary Sue. People are now
It's just kind of like there.
Being a Sue, but only if that character fits what they think a Sue has to be, which is typically a female protagonist. Even though, as we've already established, being central to the plot isn't enough to make a character a Mary Sue, the resemblance is there, and people are quick to pile on with the accusations if they happen to dislike the character for whatever reason. But the definition being used is straight up inaccurate. It has false positives and false negatives. Not every surprisingly badass female hero is a Mary Sue, and not every dude hero is free from the Sue-ness. And this wouldn't be a problem if people weren't disproportionately ashamed of writing or enjoying reading about a character who's been branded a Mary Sue. Rather than just following the character's adventures, there's this lingering fear that the character might turn out to be a Mary Sue, making you either a hack writer or dumb for liking them. And because male characters are supremely unlikely to be called out for Sue-ness, this shame mostly roots itself in female protagonists. And the thing that makes this disproportionately bad is that an accusation of Sue-ness is a conversation ender. The character's been tainted. Their strengths and confidence are suddenly negative traits that you're not allowed to admire. And because Mary Sue is very strongly a girl-associated trope that never really sticks when applied to a male character, the accusation of Sue-ness basically only ever makes it shameful to like female characters. And it is shame. How weird is that? We've made a literary device whose very name being mentioned is capable of instantly stripping the joy out of a girl-centric story. I mean, nobody watching Dragon Ball is worried about being called out for liking Goku, except by Vegeta fans, even though he's a ludicrously powerful central character who everybody likes, who keeps pulling new abilities out of his ass and basically never loses, except when he needs to get the almost dying power.
Crud.
I mean, hell, I like Goku, but the universe keeps finding new exciting ways to
instead,
make him
I'm
even more
going
awesome, even at the cost
to...
of logic or established reality.
Wait,
and
how did I do it last time?
By the definition most people seem to use. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't like Goku. Personally, I think the strength of his supporting cast
I forgot how I did it
last
last
time.
time.
Even if it weren't, it's just
So,
fun.
the mouth on here,
Recognize that
it
there's a
had
disproportionate level
like
of shame
the
and anger directed
like
towards female
frown
characters that
basically
have
on
even more
it,
Sue-ness about them,
and the
while
frown was
corresponding
basically
male
supposed
character
to be
gets to
another
full-on
expression
heroism with nary a side
that
glance.
I was
And
gonna
that's purely
add because it's supposed to be like two
tropes
different mouth
recognize
forms,
the
and I can't remember how to do it.
female
I'm pretty
characters.
sure it was like
hell,
one
if
more
you go back 1,000
parameter.
years or so
You
and
just
think
like
of
add like
Beowulf, you see
frown.
that Mary Sues have always existed. Beowulf's character is, look at Beowulf, he's so cool. Isn't it amazing how he never loses and everybody loves him? Beowulf's story is, look at Beowulf, he's so cool. Isn't it great how the universe conspires to help him out right up until he has the most amazing death and burial in history? And if you like or relate to a character that the world calls a Mary Sue, don't let that stop you from liking it. Nobody else gets to dictate your tastes. And there's no shame in just enjoying something. You don't need to justify liking or disliking a character. Everyone's got their tastes. Don't force yourself to hate a character just because the world tells you you're not allowed to relate to them, or like one just because the world tells you you have to. Your tastes are your own, and you have the power to stop the conversation there. Someone else not relating to a hero you like, even someone making solid arguments for that character being a Mary Sue, doesn't mean you have to change your taste to fit their narrative. You're allowed to have plain stupid fun.
Neither of them
That's
are
not
green.
to say that Mary Sue isn't a real writing problem, but the traits we commonly ascribe to Mary Sue characters are not what make them Mary Sues. A Mary Sue is just symptomatic of a specific strain of poor writing, where the author prioritizes the glorification of a specific character over the story they're actually trying to tell. But because the iconic, trope-codifying Mary Sue looks like a gorgeous, perfect female protagonist who does a lot of the important plot stuff, that's what people use to recognize the trope in action. And that's just inaccurate. And the corresponding levels of hate people get for writing and liking characters that fit that model discourages people from writing or reading stories with female heroes, because they run the risk of being branded with the dreaded Mary Sue label just because they look like they fit the stereotype. And don't get me wrong, don't write Mary Sues. They're boring. But maybe we should recognize that Mary Sue hasn't been a perky 15-year-old girl hero with natural highlights and color-changing eyes since 1973, and maybe it's time we updated
I like the concept of color-changing eyes.
So yeah.
Literally, like, when I was younger, I used to make OCs, and they would have color-changing eyes. I don't know if that's, like, considered, like, a Mary Sue trait or what. I just thought it was, like, a fun idea. Like, it's, like, the unnatural eye colors are just so fun to do. It's just, like, so weird, because then you want your character to be, like, perfect and stuff. And that's why it's, like, Mary Sue's, like, more, like, associated with, like, children. Like, with, like, children-making characters, because they want them to be, like, all-powerful and, like, get out of, like, almost every situation and stuff and, like, be flawless. Since, like, that's, like, what children, like imagine, like, a perfect person would be, is flawless. But, like, it's so interesting how, like, it's just not the case. Like, you can be flawed and still be a Mary Sue, and you can be flawless and still be a Mary Sue. It's weird. It's really freaking weird, and I freaking love this freaking series. And yes.
Surprise you, I am a huge sucker for classic Paragon heroes. What can I say? I like characters that are good. I like seeing them make friends, help people, turn enemies into allies. I like paragons. They're hopelessly cliche and have fallen out of fashion, but I love them anyway. Now, this might be surprising because, as most of you know, I spend a lot of time talking about how realism can add creativity and meaning to stories and how textbook characters tend to be pretty boring, and, you know, I stand by that. But the trick with the Paragon is that their character is almost never as important as how they affect other characters. What is there to say about a Paragon? They're good, they're friendly, they're forgiving, except in the case of truly evil beings. They might have a tragic backstory or a grand destiny, but practically speaking, they're good and open and try to do the right thing. They don't tend to struggle with the morality or the motivation of their actions, and their character development tends to be limited to finding new causes to champion. But what does that do to the characters they interact with? See, the Paragon hero does something to the people around them. They inspire. Sometimes their open friendliness ties the group together, sometimes their reflexive desire to help the helpless starts rubbing off on their more jaded friends, sometimes the sheer trust they place in someone makes that person want to fulfill that trust. You look at this guy and you just end up getting a big old case of the warm fuzzies just by the sheer positivity radiating off of him.
Sometimes I want to punch you in your perfect teeth.
And sometimes that happens. Actually, a lot of the time. Now, the point is, this character, this Paragon, is usually mostly important for the effect they have on the story as a whole. Sure, they have a unique-ish personality in there, but their behavior is generally going to be very predictable. I mean, there's only so nuanced a good person who does good can be. But what that character does do that's a little less predictable is draw other, more nuanced characters into the wake of their do-gooding. There are two main examples of this, and they're both really obvious. There's Superman, specifically from the cartoon, and there's Captain America from the MCU. Both start off doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do and they can do it. Both end up inspiring an increasing number of other heroes to follow in their footsteps, and both end up sort of leading an expanding crew of heroes. None as Paragon or as idealistic as they are, but all inspired to try and do what they did. This doesn't get much focus in the Justice League cartoon, but Cap Civil War actually kind of dissects this trope in a pretty clever way. If you've somehow managed to avoid seeing that movie, you might want to skip this part, but basically, literally everyone in this movie is of the opinion that, of course he's doing this, he's Captain Goddamn America. The only discrepancy is whether or not they're siding with him. The ones on his side are following him because he's Captain Goddamn America, while the ones opposing him are like, there's no use debating this with him because he's Captain Goddamn America and he's certain he's doing the right thing. Now, it's a matter of furious debate if he is in the right, but the fact is that everyone involved in that whole fiasco is involved because of Cap, either because they're on his side or they know the only way to stop him is by brute force. Now, Cap is actually supremely oblivious to the sheer weight of charisma he's lugging around, case in point, but more specifically, when he asks the other heroes for help, he's disregarding the fact that most of them will side with him just by virtue of the fact that he's Captain Goddamn America, regardless of what cause he happens to be championing. It doesn't seem to occur to him that he probably inspired most of them to do everything they're doing. Tony's having to appeal to people's bigger picture sense of logic, but Cap just has to flash his stoic handsomeness in their direction and they're gravitating to his side like it's a thing to do. Because he's the focus, because he's the one who inspired them all, He's also the linchpin that makes them fall apart. Everything that happens in this movie happens because Captain America is so much of a presence that everybody is orienting themselves around him by necessity. Hey, I think I finally figured out why this wasn't branded as an Avengers movie. Alright, spoilers done. The short of it is Civil War is something of a dissection of the hero inspiring others effect and where it can lead. Now, of course, it's less of an idealistic situation, but it's still a remarkably interesting look into the potential power and devastation that a paragon can wreak through sheer force of personality. And whenever this character appears in anime specifically, the most common thing for them to do is to turn all of their even slightly redeemable enemies into allies within the space of a season or less. The thing is, the most interesting part of the paragon character is that they're basically a catalyst for character development in other people. We've touched on how this can turn villains into heroes and heroes into more heroic heroes, but they can also sometimes trigger wacky existential crises and straight up villains just because of their sheer goodness. Going back to Cap for a minute, if we look at the first movie, we find this moment where the Red Skull is monologuing about how they're both gods among men, yada yada yada, to which Cap responds with, "I'm just a kid from Brooklyn." And this makes Skull go berserk. See, Red Skull sees himself in Cap, or rather, sees what he should have been.
Thank you for lurking, Shokora.
Appropriate. So when he hears Cap's just a kid from
Please
Brooklyn
enjoy
thing, his ego can't handle it. It's a classic case of evil can't comprehend good, which is a trope on its own, but basically Cap's sheer frank humility causes him to actually lose his cool and break down. And this is actually pretty typical in the cases where the bad guy turns into a good guy later as well. Usually something the hero's doing is totally weird to them, and their difficulty puzzling it out leads to them re-examining their priorities in some way. Or like Scully up there, it makes himself
teeth down a little bit more.
The Paragon themselves is a confusing archetype. As we've defined them, what makes them the Paragon is their general goodness and their tendency to
I can't tell if like the teeth are just like meant to be like really long and like not showy or what.
And they're all very distinct.
Like I need to
They're
ask.
not all nice. They don't all trust easily. Some are good simply because good needs
I need to
doing, and
ask
some
about
are violent in the
this.
face of concrete adversity. I mean, for crying out loud, Son Goku doesn't even do good on purpose.
Because
His
like the
motivation
teeth
is
like
and has
normally
always
would be
been
like
to
this,
get
so at least like the
stronger
top
and
part,
fight
like the
people.
top
There's
part
no
is showing,
more
not just the
opposite at all. And
fangs.
as crazy
But I
as it
can't
sounds,
tell if
on
like
the opposite end of the
the
paragon
the height of it
spectrum,
is like
Batman
intentional,
is the paragon.
intentional or not.
Does the right thing because it's the right thing to do. That's really all you need. And with the extended Bat Fam, it's obvious he's got the inspiring part down too. So given the crazy range of character types that fall under the Paragon umbrella, how do you write a Paragon? I mean, we haven't even really been able to define Paragons. We've just identified a way they're used in the story with relation to the other characters. That doesn't tell us anything about them as a character. It just gives us a few traits that can each manifest in a whole bunch of different ways. It seems like it should be the easiest question in the world to answer, but the more we look at what makes a Paragon character, the less we seem to know. See, the Paragon actually has a lot of leeway in how they're characterized. We only have two defining traits: that they generally do good when good can be done, and that other characters kind of flock to them, whether as allies or enemies or something in between. This gives us a ton of possibilities for the actual character so long as we adhere to those two traits. They can be bright and optimistic or struggling with trauma, open and trusting or a little more closed off. They might have a dark side or just be a straight up nice person with no caveats. The Paragon can be almost anyone so long as they act, Paragon. And this also means they can be flawed. I know, crazy, right? The desire for realistically flawed characters seems to have pulled the image of protagonist away from Paragon, but all you need for a Paragon is a person who does the right thing whenever they can. That doesn't mean they're a perfect human being. For an example of a flawed Paragon, let's look at cartoon-era Superman again. Supes is a lot of things, hero being the most obvious, but he's not perfect. In fact, his biggest flaw is an inability to trust other people to do things right. See, Superman is the most powerful hero on Earth, and he knows it. This awareness manifests in positive and negative ways. On the positive side of things, he has this tendency to fling himself in the way of stuff that could seriously hurt his squishier teammates or the world at large because he's very aware of how fragile everything is. But on the negative side of things, he kind of puts himself in charge of everything because he believes on some level that he can take care of everything. See, Superman never internalized the idea that he might not be able to do everything on his own. Even Batman is more of a team player than he is. Unfortunately, this becomes dangerous when he disagrees with the League, because whenever that happens, he does things his way anyway. Superman doesn't really respect anybody as an equal, and as a result, he's pretty quick to drop the team player thing when he thinks he could do a better job himself. This is mostly visible when Lex Luthor is involved, since Superman is pretty quick to assume Lex is up to no good, and even though he's always right, Lex is very good at playing him and making him look like a paranoid demigod holding a grudge. Superman is still unconditionally a Paragon hero, but that specific character flaw makes him actually very dangerous, as seen in the popular alternate universe.
This is auto-generated. I'm stupid. I was like, why does it look like this? Why is it so ugly?
Even paragons can be less than one step away
The
from becoming
frigging mesh is
horrible paragon dictators. It's just a
auto-generated.
matter of putting them in
So
situations where their
stupid.
personal definition of the right thing to do doesn't necessarily mesh with ours. And that's actually one of the most interesting things to do with paragons. See, it's never really a surprise when your paragon does something good. Sometimes stories will put a paragon in a situation where the right thing to do might be dangerous or personally offensive to them, but because they're paragons, they're gonna do it anyway. If you really want your paragon hero to act unpredictably or dangerously or in a way that has your audience going, "Ho, don't do it," you put them into a situation that appeals to their humanity, not their heroism. Superman kills President Lex Luthor in the alternate timeline because Luthor had killed the Flash, and Superman, guided in part by grief, in part by rage, and in part by a misplaced feeling of responsibility, decided the right thing to do was prevent Luthor from ever doing anything that bad again. He subsequently took over the world because he decided the right thing to do was preventing anyone from ever doing anything that bad again. Back on the Marvel side of things, Cap kicked off the events of Civil War because his brainwashed buddy was in danger and he decided the right thing to do was to protect him, even at the cost of his friends being stuck in a super gulag. See, paragons can actually be really dangerous, and therefore, from a writing perspective, really interesting, because if you can get them to think that the right thing to do is something objectively dangerous or bad, they'll pursue it with the same single-minded stubbornness they do all their good deeds with. Now this actually gives you an interesting possibility, making a paragon an antagonist to your hero. See, when the story isn't centered on the paragon, they can unsurprisingly come across as pretty annoying. They've got this tendency to assume that their own moral compass must be universal, so if your protagonist happens to be in more of a gray area, they might take offense. And if your character has the misfortune to be something generally considered evil by default, like a demon or monster, a paragon who sees them as inherently irredeemable might end up being their greatest threat. See, paragons are almost never written with any kind of character development that forces them to re-examine their definition of good. When it comes to right and wrong, they're intensely stubborn.
Yeah.
Any kind of stubbornness in a character has the potential to become dangerous in the wrong situations. As a result, it's actually very easy to show the flaws in a paragon character without compromising their paragonness. And this is important because paragons, traditional, shining, perfect paragons, have fallen out of fashion as a result of the trend towards gritty, flawed realism. So as a result of that shift, we get to see DC's greatest paragons, Batman and Superman, each lose their ingrained sense of right and wrong and start conforming to the letter of their characterization but not the spirit. Case in point, Batman killing in the more recent movies. And that's kind of, it's not really what their characters are for. Alright, simmer down. My point is, you don't need to sacrifice a character's paragonness to make them less than perfect. Paragons already aren't perfect. They're stubborn, they tend to think of themselves as the highest authority on their own behavior, and they can be really dangerous if that clashes with reality. They're not gritty flaws, but they can be devastating, and you can tell a lot of interesting, and yes, dark stories about a paragon's influence on their world without sacrificing their paragon nature. So I guess maybe instead of making all our heroes and villains gritty, flawed, moral gray areas, we could start throwing in some characters that are dangerously certain that they're doing the right thing. I don't know, could be fun. So, yeah. What's the best way to tell that you've been magically transported to a fictional universe? Well, besides everyone being staggeringly beautiful and never using filler words, your first clue will probably be that stuff starts happening in threes. 3 trials, 3 characters, 3 brothers, 3 great gods, 3 tries to make something work, 3 home siblings. Stuff just keeps happening in threes. What's up with that? This trope is so old and widespread, we can't even really call it a trope. It's just a thing. It's a rhythm in fiction to the degree that it just feels natural for stuff to happen in threes. We talk with sets of 3 examples or descriptors, we repeat ourselves 3 times, we make trios of protagonists and put them through 3 acts in sets of 3 trials. Seriously, I just did the 3 example thing right now. What the heck? Now, it's not strictly universal, but it is pretty widespread in modern literature. On a grand scale, mythical world building often splits the world into 3s. Heaven, Earth, and Underworld is a pretty common subdivision, sometimes reskinned as human, spirit, and demon worlds, while in Norse took it a step further and divided the universe into 3 levels, each containing its own set of 3 worlds. This triple world system has obvious literary advantages. It gives you the familiar world, the dangerous otherworld, and the cool otherworld, allowing you 2 varieties of magical journeys for the price of 1. It also lets you pit those worlds against each other if you want, which lets you have your familiar world get stuck in the middle of some kind of trans-dimensional conflict. One step down from the world scale, triple deities are also very common. Beyond the obvious Christian example, we have the 3 sons of Kronos ruling the 3 districts of the world, the triple goddess Hecate, the 3 fates, the 3 graces, the 3 Hindu gods Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva handling the creation.
Yeah, rule 3 is actually really freaking common.
There's tons of them. And in modern fiction, this is also crazy common. There's 3 goddesses in the Zelda series, 3 Egyptian god cards, 3 Silmarils,
thrills, all
Cold.
that jazz. Then when we get down to the scale of story structure, we have the 3 trials system. We also have that 3-act thing, but that's much more of a modern construct. We'll talk about it later.
I normally
The
just skip 2
3 trials
examples
system
because
is
I
used to
think
folklore,
3 is
probably older, wherein a character gets dropped
too
into a
much
situation
effort.
and has to overcome 3 trials to move to a different situation, or has to accomplish some task and gets 3 tries to do it. In modern literature, tension building demands that our hero fail twice, then succeed on the 3rd try, and this can be as large scale as 3 tries to take down the evil overlord, or as small scale as 3 tries to grab this falling object. And on the smallest scale, story-wise, characters will often come in sets of 3. In folklore, sets of 3 siblings are really common, often coinciding with the 3 trials format. Each sibling takes a trial, and only the 3rd and youngest child succeeds. Or sometimes they all make a choice, and only the youngest child gets the choice right. But trios of siblings aren't as common in modern literature. It's generally been replaced by the power trio, a group of 3 protagonists who play off each other's strengths to kick a beautiful rain
There
of
we
ass
go.
together. Common trio formats include fighter, rogue, mage, brains, brawn,
Oh.
looks, combat, diplomacy, stealth, hero, best
This is the
friend,
wrong
girl,
one.
etc.
Dang
Now,
it.
in modern literature, sets of 3 heroes are common, but not universal. 5 to 7 heroes also show up. But when that happens, you often find that at the heart of the group there is a trio. Maybe 3 old friends, supplemented by a few new allies, or a trio of general badasses with a couple more fragile specialists. The 5-man band format will often have a core trio fitting one of the aforementioned triple tropes, with the addition of a couple supplementary characters to support the trio in some way. In some cases, the trio is itself a support role to one or more of the added characters. Maybe they stumble on a protagonist or two and end up forming the comic relief squad to contrast the newfound drama of their new buddies. Whether or not the trio will be relegated to a comedy role kind of depends on whether or not the trio contains the hero, but regardless, when you have a set of more than 3 characters, you're probably going to find a close-knit trio embedded in the group. Now, going back to the 3 trials thing, there are 2 main rhythms that get used. Either all the trials go the same way, or the first 2 go one way and the 3rd goes the other. The first mostly happens when the hero can't afford to fail, at which point plot armor will guarantee success. The second, however, is rather more interesting. See, the hero that fails twice and succeeds the 3rd time is very prevalent in modern literature because the payoff is, to us, maximally effective. If they succeed on the first try, it doesn't feel like they were challenged. If they fail once and then succeed, it feels like the first one might have been a fluke. But if they fail at least twice, the stakes get raised. We get the impression that this task is hard, possibly getting more difficult even as our heroes become better prepared. The eventual victory becomes delayed gratification and feels a lot more earned than an easy win. And this is definitely useful. But if, instead of delayed gratification, you'd rather twist the knife a little, you can invoke the inverse of the lose-lose-win model. Have your heroes succeed at every step but the last one. Often this ends up nested in the lose-lose-win model. If attempt number 2 involves a complex multi-step plan that looks like it should work, but then everything falls apart on step 2C. This can lead to a second act darkest hour scenario, especially if the plan failing had significant negative consequences. The Avatar episodes about the Day of Black Sun are a really good example of this. Overall, the win-win-lose thing works very well to make your audience feel bad, which is always a useful ability to have. But now we gotta talk about subversion. Most of the time when you have a trope, you also gotta consider the pros and cons of subverting the trope. Generally, the first pro is that it's by definition unexpected, but the first con is that as a result, you need to do a lot more work to make that part of the story flow smoothly. Tropes are narrative shortcuts. Avoiding the trope means avoiding the shortcut. So how do we subvert the rule of 3? And more importantly, should we? See, the rule of 3 is, as I said earlier, more than a trope. It's like a literary time signature. It gives the narrative a rhythm, a comfortable pattern, and a degree of stability. See? I just did it there. 3 example patterns are super common in spoken English because they feel most effective. Enough descriptors to give an overall feel for the thing, but not so many as to bore your audience. And 3 is a solid number for that exact reason. Enough to give multiple things to work with, but not so many as to confuse or overburden the audience. 3 protagonists is a solid base of characters. It gives you 3 possible
Yeah, exactly. I like it when they do that because it's not like end all be all. It's like people still get a chance to actually do something.
Still exist, but they'll leave someone
Oh,
excluded.
wait, they
as these
stretch.
Conversations can accommodate at most 3 people comfortably. And of course, suddenly you have 6 inter-character relationships to keep in mind, doubling the number of relationships your audience needs to keep straight. It's easier to care less and less about the characters the more characters you have to deal with. Even if you have a least favorite member of a character trio, you probably still appreciate the interactions that character makes possible. Most people don't like Ron as much as Harry or Hermione, but even the most cold-hearted of us can appreciate his beautiful friendship with Harry that the movies shamefully ignored. Okay, so trios of characters seem like a good idea. Even in groups of 5 or more, subdividing into groups of 2 and 3 lets us retain the benefits of trio dynamics. You can subvert the rule of 3 here, but it's a little hard to pull off, in part because the rule of 3 tends to naturally arise in human social structures in any group of 5 or more. Okay, so what about the 3 worlds thing? That one you can totally subvert. One world is traditional, one living world and a catch-all underworld is common. The addition of a dream world or an astral plane can offset any number of worlds. In that case, the rule of three is almost purely out of habit, and can and has been easily subverted. The three trial format can also be subverted. In fact, it's one of the easiest ways to throw your audience off balance. Maybe your character passes all three tests, but then there's a fourth test and now they're back at square one. Or maybe they have to do a thing and they get it on their first try. Or heck, start throwing around other recurring numbers. Maybe they have 7 tasks to complete, or 4, or whatever. You can also have the first 2 play out as expected, then subvert expectations on the third and add a 4th. Whatever, it's quick, painless, and an easy way to thwart audience expectations. It's another case where the rule of 3 is mostly just a habit, and subverting it doesn't really negatively affect the story that much. So we can see that the rule of 3 isn't really a rule at all. But it is a rhythm in a lot of Western literature, most likely because the rule of 3 was almost universal in European folklore, which is one of the biggest sources of literary inspiration for modern-day Western media. It shows up a lot less outside that sphere of influence, because the pattern of recurring threes doesn't show up very much in East Asian, South Asian, or African literature. You do get the 3 regalia in Japan, and the Rama, Vishnu, Shiva trinity in Hinduism, and there's at least one 3-event rhythm instance in the Epic of Sunjata, but 5s or 7s are much more common in literature inspired by stuff outside of European folklore. There's 7 years in exile, like Sunjata and his family. There are 7 sins or virtues. Sometimes 7 siblings will show up. 7 years and 7 people tend to be fairly common. And 5s are very common, but only in groups of people. You almost never get the 5 years in exile.
Where is it?
There are 5 Pandava brothers in the Mahabharata and 5 pilgrims in Journey to the West, and together they're pretty much responsible for every 5-man band in modern literature. And it's notable that both of these groups do easily subdivide into a core group of 3. Arjuna, Bhima, and Yudhishthira for the Pandavas, with the twins in a more supporting role. Tripitaka, Sun Wukong, and Pigsy for the Journey to the West, with Sandy and the horse largely irrelevant to the progression of the plot. But as for the rhythm of events happening in 3s, as far as I know, that's barely present outside of European folklore. And as for the 3-act structure, as near as I can tell, that came out of nowhere, because early folklore was a freaking mess without any structure, let alone a 3-act setup conflict resolution. Like, for a quick example, let's talk about the Albanian precursor to the modern Cinderella. Now, modern Cinderella is a polished 3-act beauty of a story. The setup is that she's stuck in an abusive household with a stepmother who hates her. The conflict is that she wants to go to the ball, but her stepmother and stepsisters sabotage her. The resolution is that fairy god Jesus emerges from out of nowhere to make her dreams
Fairy god
Original
Jesus.
is much less structured. To start, Proto-Cinderella's dead mother left her a magic cow.
I love
The stepmother
that.
keeps finding new excuses to abuse Proto-Cinderella and gives her impossible chores to complete so she can beat her when she fails to finish in time, but every time that happens, the magic cow magically boosts her speed to make her fast enough to do the chores. Stepmother gets sick of it and convinces her husband to kill the cow. Proto-Cinderella buries the bones, but they continue to talk to her and give her magic benefits, which is good, because her stepmother has seen all the boys flocking around her and she hates the idea that Proto-Cinderella might get married before her own daughter. So she forces Proto-Cinderella to coat her face in soot to make her ugly. You could say this is all setup, but we're also kinda getting a little hint of conflict here, even though we haven't even mentioned the ball yet. So post-uglifying, the magic necro cow magically gives Cinderella a makeover and a fabulous dress so she can go to dance in town without her stepmother catching on. So she does, and the prince, who happens to be around, dances with her. She goes home, returns her magic glam kit to the necro cow, and goes about her day, but the prince decides to hold a dance to try and find that mystery girl he danced with. Proto-Cinderella Sailor Moons it up again, goes to the ball, and dances with the prince, then returns to her secret identity as impoverished peasant girl. The next week the prince does it again, she goes to the dance again, and this time he grabs her shoe, uses it to find her the next day, happily ever after, blah blah blah. This story is almost completely unstructured. At best, it's divided in 2, between the cow being alive and the cow being dead. There's barely any conflict, since the necro cow is too powerful for the stepmother to adequately combat, and Proto-Cinderella gets her happy ending without any kind of 3rd-act intervention. And that's one of the more tame pieces of folklore. There's this other one where a girl with a wicked stepmother goes through an entire nightmarish trial scenario to transform a cursed prince back to being human, then marries him. That's its own 3-trial structure. But then she gets lost, finds and rescues another prince who is stuck dying every morning and being resurrected every night. She marries him, and then her first husband finds out and they have this huge fight over her, and when they're both tuckered out, she dies of dehydration. It makes no sense by modern literary standards. That's like 4 separate stories all wrapped up in there. The bottom line is folklore was pretty much unstructured by modern standards because stuff just kept happening in this weird stream of consciousness pattern. And the thing about the 3-act structure is you can kind of justify claiming that any structure follows it.
Oh, I actually reflected it, didn't I?
Say that the setup is the part where the cow is alive, the conflict begins when the stepmother tries to prevent her from getting married, and the resolution begins when the prince stealing the shoe. Like, we can totally say that.
Meant to synthesize it, not reflect it.
That the story wasn't written that way. Any story can be divided into setup, conflict, resolution, because conflict can be as big and complicated or as
Thank you for care back, Jordan.
And its setup and resolution can be less than a sentence each. Not even mentioning all the stories where the resolution is basically a total lack of resolution, like the story where the princess dies at the end. In a way, the 3-act structure is similar to the rule of 3 in that it's much more of an observable phenomenon than an actual rule you have to follow verbatim. Most stories have a setup, some kind of conflict, and some kind of conflict resolution, but that's about as helpful as saying that most songs have a few bars at the beginning before the singing starts. It's true, but it's not really a rule. This is where you basically run into the numerology problem. It's possible to mathematically finagle your way into any kind of numerical result if you're determined enough.
Wiggle.
Writing loves bringing stuff full circle. Mirrors and parallels.
The body is still bothering the hell out of me though.
Folklore tends to be very unpolished. Rather than a specific moral or message, it's just a series of events. It's only when it gets cleaned up for modern consumption that you start getting framing sequences.
Oh wait, it's all on body why. It explains a lot. Give me a sec.
It's meant to make a story clean, self-contained, and good.
Delete.
Without that, there's no visible 3-act structure, which makes me think that it's probably a byproduct of modern writing rather than the overall rule of 3, which seems to have arisen from rhythms in European.
Oh, the neck isn't even long enough.
So, yeah.
Thought it was. Oh no, I literally like added it like right as like where the stump stops. Is it separate? If it's separate, like no, it's not separate. Dang it.
Here's a trick question.
Here we're gonna try something. We're gonna do a bit of surgery.
Strong male characters. Isn't that a double standard? Well, here's why it's a trick question. We do talk about strong male characters, but we call them things like heroes or badasses or mentors. We don't need to specify that they're male because people just assume. There's this thing I've noticed in modern Western writing where any trait that isn't white or male or straight is kind of considered to be a modifier on a character. Those 3 traits are considered kind of a default baseline. Now this is also why people will often say stuff like, why did you have to make this character gay or not white or female? It's not strictly necessary for the plot, so why would you do it? But most of those same people don't bother to ask why you would make a character a white straight male. Although that is changing a little bit nowadays, but basically, in America at least, that's often considered the default state of being in fiction, even though there's no such thing as a default state of being in real life. Now basically, every culture and time period has this kind of thing. Everyone's got some default assumption about what a person is.
Non-default.
But for the sake of this discussion, we're going to talk about
anti-default
Western conception of a default. So we don't say strong male character for the same reason we don't generally talk about heterosexual representation. Masculinity is assumed until proven otherwise. That triple trait template is kind of considered to be a blank slate, and people have all kinds of reasons to explain why that is, but that's not what I want to talk about today. See, we recognize a lot of potentially iffy stereotypes in characters that deviate from this perceived baseline. A lot of people have noted that making a female character is a huge pain because she'll be criticized for any feminine traits she has as well as any lack of feminine traits. This is actually a very recurrent problem. Characters will be criticized for the stereotypes they fulfill and decried as unrealistic for the stereotypes they don't. But you'd think this wouldn't be a problem for the perceived baseline, right? If you don't want to borrow any trouble, you just write a character that fits all the default demographics and call it a day. Because those 3 traits are seen as default settings, we don't really examine them and we kind of assume that a blank slate wouldn't have associated stereotypes with it. But they're not actually empty of assumptions.
I hope people get terrified by how I'm doing this, because I'm not even like thinking this through, I'm just kind of like doing it.
First of all, I basically never noticed this stuff before this topic was
Be
suggested.
afraid of my work,
I've read and
not of my art meshes.
Them for stereotypes. See, it's easiest to notice weird assumptions or stereotypes in a character when you otherwise relate to the character, but that particular assumption doesn't gel with you for whatever reason. I mostly got weirded out when characters kissed on screen, or when girl characters were weirdly lacking in autonomy. It frankly didn't occur to me to examine male characters with the same level of scrutiny. Probably because I was already used to not fully relating to the characters, so it didn't really click that there might be more to that disconnect than just a difference in gender experience. So I'd like to preemptively apologize if this episode is either too esoteric or too obvious. This is all kind of new territory for me. So to start us off with the first thing I noticed, and something I was initially planning on making its own trope talk, male protagonist characters as a rule seemingly have to be strong and physically competent if they're in anything resembling an action context. The rules are different for comedies, possibly because an easy source of comedy is a character that doesn't conform to heroic ideals. But I mean, why wouldn't an action hero be a physically badass dude? Well, just because the average guy is stronger than the average girl doesn't mean all guys are strong by any general metric, and even the ones that are strong aren't necessarily combat trained. Strength is all well and good, and I do my push-ups for exactly that reason, but I know my fair share of totally lovable, weedy nerds who never really saw the point in beefing up. Now, it might seem weird to complain about this trait in an action context because, among other things, most stories take place in challenging circumstances where stuff like physical strength and stamina comes in handy. We don't go to the movies to watch Joe Schmo get winded trying to outrun a crashing helicopter. Well, first off, I'm not actually complaining about this assumption, I'm just trying to draw attention to it. I love badasses, but we sure seem to have a lot of them these days. But more importantly, physical strength or prowess isn't the only way to entertain, and in fact, this particular stereotype becomes more obvious as a stereotype rather than a necessity when you look at the range of female characters, because girls in action or adventure contexts are allowed to be strong in different ways. They can be magical powerhouses, dexterous skilled archers, Black Widow-style martial artists, barrier maidens, physical gods, indestructible robots or engineered soldiers, or even just emotionally strong. You have your queens putting on an unbreakable brave facade in the face of political turmoil, or the hardened broken bird military badass who doesn't let herself feel anymore, or even the unshakably happy character who never drops her optimism even in the face of mortal danger. But guy protagonists generally have to be generically strong, physically hardy, iron-willed, average, skilled enough to take down a single dude opponent in a fight. This is supplemented by more specialist skills.
Wait, I'm so confused. What am I looking at?
Literature is explicitly a master at handling combat, but is of course mostly known for his detective work and propensity for ludicrous disguises. But for the most part, male protagonists have to be almost implausibly badass as the default. Now, there's
they're not named.
Specific exception. If your hero is a chosen one, he's allowed to not start out badass, but it's generally expected that he'll become badass in the future, most likely outstripping his mentors in the process. It's also kind of notable that when male protagonists deviate from this stereotypical norm, oftentimes they will be accused by the audience of being gay, handily removing them from the default straight guy template altogether. And look, I see the Frodo-Sam chemistry too, but Frodo is also very much not a physically strong or iron-willed character. He's not traditionally masculine in that regard, despite his incredible bravery. Frodo, by all accounts, appears to fit the default template parameters, but he doesn't fit this stereotype, so
let me see, are the eyes? How are the eyes?
Because he's not a badass in the way we consider the template to be badass. Or it could just be the internet, I don't know. Anyway, trust me, I get it. I like watching badasses. I don't know anyone who doesn't. But it shouldn't be like a requirement, right? That's gotta be exhausting. Speaking of exhausting, romance. Guy heroes are largely straight, which means guy heroes are largely
Wait, where is it?
We do get a surprising number of asexual guy heroes, which I personally appreciate, but for the most part in Western media, it's guy needs girl badly. And there's nothing wrong with that, even if I personally could go my entire life without watching another romantic subplot.
It's not
for the most part, your dude protagonist is gonna have a lady love or a
bad. It does seem to be fixed a bit, though.
He's either old or deeply traumatized, or he had a loved one, but she's dead now. Now, I am neither a guy nor am I straight, but it seems weird to me that fictional dudes are at all times either in a relationship, trying to be in a relationship, or trying to get over a relationship. I mean, God, don't you get tired? Anyway, somewhat related to that point, dude protagonists are also generally expected to be bad at girly stuff, whatever girly stuff is defined as at the time. Traditionally, this involves child rearing, housekeeping, cooking, and, most notably, interacting with and understanding other girls. If he's good at any of these things, he's generally either a comedic character in a rom-com, or if he's only explicitly good at that last thing, he's either a James Bond-type ladies' man who knows the female mind, or a character who is, for whatever reason, uninterested in or oblivious to romance, and therefore capable of interacting with girls without any weird expectations in the way. Now, this is actually an interesting change. There was a time not too long ago when guy protagonists were almost expected to be smooth-talking ladies' men, which was itself considered a masculine trait. But recently, girls have been kind of considered more incomprehensible than the older conception that girls are simple, you just need to push the right buttons to get them to do what you want. And as a consequence of this perception shift, smooth talker has largely been replaced with awkward around girls, or just oblivious. Relatable. Also, as a fun twist, sometimes female characters will be coded as more masculine, or just comedically inept, by having them be bad at this traditionally feminine stuff too. The Lethal Chef TV Tropes page, for example, is almost all girls. And just to specify, this isn't universal. Counterexamples exist. The star of Guillermo del Toro's animated TV show Troll Hunters is a male protagonist who's an expert cook. But tropes aren't like mathematical principles. The existence of individual counterexamples don't invalidate the existence or prevalence of the trope itself. Proof by contradiction doesn't work on literature. I can think of a number of dude heroes that are good cooks or good dads, but the general rule is that those traits are girly and don't belong with manly men. Good? Good. Moving on. Now, it's important to note that the dude protagonist stereotypes have changed in the past few decades as the cultural vision of masculinity has drifted. One of the big changes, beyond a general decrease in playboyness, is that your dude protagonist is now allowed to have PTSD without compromising his perceived manliness. But it's not a requirement, and it's probably worth its own episode, so let's leave that alone for now, because there's some other manly traits that are significantly less optional. For one thing, dude protagonists can be subordinate to other dudes, but very rarely to ladies. Singular male protagonists might have a boss or a CO, or a mentor of some kind, but it's far more common for that mentor figure to be male than and female. And I've actually noticed something else which is a little more complicated. If you have a 5-man band, the leader generally has to fulfill most of the manly dude hero tropes, and if he does, his subordinates are actually allowed a greater degree of freedom of characterization. The lancer, big guy, smart guy, and chick can then be any gender, and the dudes don't have to all be physically badass or brave. The big guy can be a good cook, the lancer can be more on the effeminate side, the smart guy can be utterly useless or cowardly in a fight. So long as the group collectively fulfills the manly man quota and is helmed by a dude, you're generally good to go. And I said this was a little more complicated, and it is because this video is about dude protagonists in the singular, but the 5-man band dynamics are generally collective and can actually be fairly complicated on their own. From what I've seen, leaders of 5-man bands generally shoulder most of the responsibility of fulfilling these guy hero tropes, which makes sense, since usually the leader is the hero and the other 4 members are his support, meaning the leader falls into the category of dude protagonist while the other 4 members are deuteragonists, which are as a rule allowed greater freedom of characterization because they're less central and were not as expected to be in their heads. But if the leader of the 5-man band or a group in general is a girl and the rest of the group isn't also girls, you sometimes run into weird problems. Sometimes it feels like she also needs to fulfill all those manly traits that the dude leader has. For the only examples I can think of off the top of my head, let's look at Olivia Mira Armstrong from Fullmetal Alchemist and Mulan. Both of these ladies at one point or another assume leadership roles and also out-macho the men in their stories. Olivia commands Fort Briggs, the most densely testosterone location in the entire series, and commands an army of enormous manly men with ease by virtue of being unyielding, ruthless, iron-willed, terrifying in a fight, seemingly not into dudes, and easily slinging around opponents 3 times her size. The characters
I freaking love Fullmetal Alchemist. It's such
easily
a good anime.
established manly trait. The
I
whole
want to watch it
establishment
again.
is oozing manliness, and nobody in that group is manlier than Major General Olivia Mira Armstrong. And in Mulan, which handily forms an explicit 5-person group led by a girl in the climax of the story, Mulan spends her training montage working her way up to the point where she physically outcompetes everyone training alongside her, effectively beating the dude archetype at its own macho game. And though Shang is her commanding officer, she ends up taking a leadership role in the finale and saving his life, by referencing a previous act of badassery no less. In both of these cases, female characters assuming leadership roles also assumed or possessed explicitly manly traits, often explicitly referenced as such in-universe. And for a more mentor-student example, along with a convenient illustration of the tension that can arise even when the lady in charge fulfills her manliness
I need to
quota,
split
in
these
Edge of
apart.
Tomorrow, Emily
The
Blunt's
I
character
specifically need to
explicitly
split them
meant
apart. I don't feel like
leadership
doing it right now though.
but this is
I thought
because
this
it's
wouldn't really
badass
take all that
and
long because like I'm basically
badass
already
and
almost
badass
done.
And on a somewhat
All I have to do
related
is just the
note,
hair and the body and then like make sure that everything else is like actually like moving properly and I will be done.
Bitch, even while the world hails her as a war hero. In the army, the heart of the manliness is everything paradigm, the fact that she's qualified to be in charge on the battlefield still doesn't do a whole lot to make the army cool with the fact that she's in charge on the battlefield. It's a very convenient illustration of the tension you sometimes get with male
Yes,
protagonists
I
supporting
agree.
female leaders, even if they
Dude,
are
what if I did like
badass
a Full Metal
and I
Alchemist watch
swear
party and
I'm
just like
not trying to
binged
make this
it?
dude trope episode all about girls.
I would do that. I would 100% freaking do that.
To draw in order to bring attention to the assumptions we're otherwise blind
That
to.
would be so
Anyway, the
fun.
point is, if your dude protagonist is subordinate to anyone, it's liable to either be a dude or in rare cases an explicitly dudely girl. And to clarify, just in case I didn't earlier, this is specifically a dude protagonist we're supposed to get into the head of. It's not an issue if the character is secondary or support. There's a non-manly lady in charge of a bunch of dudes in Jurassic World, but she's not in charge of manly male protagonist Chris Pratt. Now, I'm not fully certain why this no-girl bosses rule is a thing. It might just be a force of habit due to a long history of mostly dudes being in charge. It might be a social tendency to equate already discussed traits like physical strength with leadership. It might be some pseudo-biology nonsense that boils down to girls are untrustworthy harlots who won't date me. Who knows? Point is, it seems to be a thing.
Hair.
But I'd say the biggest, most
Where is the
story-centric
hair?
characteristic that male protagonists generally
do the
have is
hair
that they are,
angles.
for the most part, not allowed to be wrong. Or rather, they're not allowed
Excuse
to
me.
just be wrong. There always has to be some kind of extenuating circumstance around the wrongness. Maybe they've been tricked or misled, or in a more classical example, it's due to some deep inherent character flaw that the story is exploring. As someone who's read a truly shameful amount of classical literature, I know for a fact that heroes are definitely allowed to have heroic flaws like hubris or wrath, and if those flaws lead to their ultimate downfall, so much the better. Mistakes or errors caused by that heroic flaw are fair game, and don't really count as human error, which is what I'm talking about here. Or sometimes the pacing of the story allows them a small number of mistakes in specific circumstances. For example, if they're in a detective role and they're allowed 2 wrong conclusions per episode before reaching the correct answer. See my Rule of 3 video for why that's allowed to happen. And of course, a lot of the time, a character might seem like they were wrong about something, but later turn out to be right. Common example, maybe they didn't trust a character everyone else liked, and then it turns out that character was secretly evil. Or for the other variant, they did trust the character, but it's because their heroic flaw was just being too trusting. You get the point. Now again, this character assumption that these kinds of protagonists are generally immune to simple human error becomes more obvious when we look at character types that don't have it. For a recent and fairly well-known example, let's take a look at Moana for a second, because Moana has one key moment in her movie where she's just plain wrong, with no caveats or character character-specific motivators. The first time Moana and Maui sail to fight the lava monster Tekka, there's a moment when Moana realizes that Tekka can't leave the barrier islands, and if they sail through a narrow ravine, they'll be able to bypass her. She thinks she can make it, Maui thinks she can't, she makes a break for it, Tekka hucks a ball of lava at them, and it turns out they couldn't make it after all. As a consequence of this mistake,
Dang.
Maui's fishhook is badly damaged, and he temporarily abandons the quest, and Moana has a full-on crisis. Then there's a beautiful musical number, and Moana goes back to try again, this time just barely managing to make it through the rift with Maui running interference. The first time around, she was just plain wrong. She miscalculated. It wasn't because she had a hubris problem or she was misguided, she just screwed up. Now obviously it all works out in the end because it's a Disney movie, but that doesn't erase the initial mistake. And for contrast, let's look at some of the Disney heroes, because most Disney heroes don't generally make too many mistakes, besides trusting dudes with eye bags that could blot out the sun. Simba thinks he made a mistake that led to the death of his father, but as it turns out,
Making all them tired, them freaking tired Disney villains.
Hercules makes the quote-unquote mistake of giving up his strength to save Megara, but that's not a mistake, it's a heroic sacrifice. Roguish heroes like Aladdin or Flynn Rider tend to make mistakes in the form of falling into old habits and immediately regretting it, or going too far in the other direction and desperately trying to protect their new, better identity, but those are both explicit character-defining bad habits, and bad habits are definitely allowed as heroic flaws in heroic dudes. None of them seem to just screw up. Ever. No normal human mistakes happen. It's either a personal failing the story is expressly about correcting or exploiting for maximum tragedy, a trick, or not a real mistake anyway. Now, it's totally possible that human error in fiction is kind of like coughing. Happens all the time in real life, but only happens in fiction when stuff gets really, really bad. I don't know. Don't take this as gospel or anything. I'm only saying what I think I've observed, and despite the frankly unhealthy amounts of media I consume regularly, it doesn't mean I've got a perfect perspective on even my own cultural sphere's tropes. But basically, as far as I can tell, despite being perceived as a default character setting, Dude Protagonist has a lot of tropey baggage that's surprisingly hard to see clearly precisely because it's so ubiquitous. So, yeah?
You like that? I want like this hair to like move like a bit forward, like on the little little hair strands that are showing. So I'll fix that. But like,
Yo, who here plays tabletop RPGs?
So far?
Show of hands. Yeah! Good stuff. Alright, for those of you who don't, the main gist of it is that you and a bunch of your friends make characters and play around in a pre-made world where plot developments and major story decisions are made by the game master. It's like the GM is writing a story around you, and you friends are working stuff out and providing character interactions in the context provided. Now, the unique thing about an RPG is that even though you're constructing a story, there is no main character. You're all PCs, and therefore all equally main characters. But because it would be boring if you were all playing the same protagonist, or even if one of you could carry the entire team, you're suggested to branch out and fill different roles in the group. In general, there are 5 major roles that have to be filled to guarantee a balanced party: fighter, tank, stealth, mage, and healer. Now this is basically the party balance for D&D, but different game systems lend themselves to different specific balances. In a game like Exalted, a typical balanced solar party would basically be a priest, an assassin, a diplomat, a mage, and a warrior. And in a sci-fi setting, the mage would probably be swapped out for a hacker. But basically, the general idea is that each of these characters contributes a specific strength to the party so that together you're equipped to handle a wide array of situations. So why am I rambling about this? Well, because obviously you can also write a book like this, with a group of explicit protagonists, each with their own strengths and weaknesses, rather than one catch-all protagonist and a bunch of deuteragonists. The most prevalent version of this is the 5-man band, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. The 5-man band is an extremely common and useful trope in modern media, and is generally broken down into the following character archetypes: the leader, the lancer, the big guy, the smart guy, and the heart. So let's look at these archetypes in a little more detail. Starting at the top, we have the leader. This guy is, unsurprisingly, the team leader, and probably the most generically heroic of the bunch. Structurally, he's
why are
the
they
center of the
mirrored?
team. He'll have generally developed relationships with every other member of the group, and was probably one of the first members of the group during its
That makes a
initial
lot more
formation.
sense,
He's generally
actually.
a well-rounded, close-range fighter, and is the least likely to have some sort of specialized ability to augment those powers. He also conforms the least to my RPG thing from earlier, since the leader stands a good chance of also being the hero, making him the central focus of the story and the rest of the 5-man band's secondary protagonists. But in a lot of cases, he's actually not given much more plot precedence than the rest of the group, in which case all members of the party will share the protagonist label about equally. In general, the leader is balanced, a strong fighter, and can rally the other characters behind him without too much difficulty.
Oh my
One step out
god.
from the leader, we get
Honestly,
the
I don't
lancer.
know
The
what.
lancer is pretty much a foil for the leader, which means their personal characterization is strongly based on the leader's characterization. If the leader is calm, the lancer will be a hothead. If the leader is a team player, the lancer will be a loner. If the leader is inexperienced, the lancer will outclass him in everything but leading, but in contrast, if the leader is experienced, the lancer will explicitly have a lot to learn from him. The lancer generally has a complicated and deep relationship with the leader, usually either a form of rivalry or jealousy, but in rare cases a deep respect. Sometimes both. The lancer is also generally most of the audience's favorite character, because they're allowed a lot more character complexity than the leader, and if the leader comes across as too paragon, the Lancer might be a realistic breath of fresh air. In some stories, the Lancer has a really good relationship with the leader. They might disagree on occasion, but fundamentally they've got each other's backs. In others, the Lancer predominantly exists to question the leader's judgment until he inevitably learns to respect the hard decisions and the burden of leadership. Or he turns evil for a week. I'd say it's about 70-30 odds on that one. Rounding out the central trio of the five-man band, we have the Heart. The Heart is usually a girl, and sometimes that's basically where her characterization ends, but in the more well-rounded cases, the Heart is just that, the emotional center of the team. She's more often than not a love interest for the leader or the Lancer, or both, but more broadly, she's the team member responsible for keeping everybody else grounded. In a dramatic world with personal vendettas and villains every few feet, having a character that keeps your other characters from going too far is a valuable literary asset. She's likely to be the most emotional and passionate member of the crew, and her heroic or compassionate instincts might be what drives the group to heroically intervene on the behalf of others. She'll be very compassionate and kind towards others, which doesn't always make her nice, but she is usually a nice person. Beyond that, however, her personality and combat capabilities are totally up in the air. She can be demure or aggressive, a total support character, or a powerhouse, and anything in between. However, due to party balance rules, if she does have a combat role, she'll usually end up filling some niche combat capacity that none of the teammates explicitly have without much overlap. Being an archer is pretty common, or in a superhero setting she's probably psychic, but more often than not, the Heart is fairly useless in a straight fight. So these three tend to be the central trifecta of the five-man band, and usually can operate as a power trio if the other two characters aren't there, but not always. Sometimes the Heart instead forms a trio with the last two members, the big guy and the smart guy. The big guy is big, usually in body, but sometimes just metaphorically. The big guy plays the role of tank, and frequently, but not always, outpaces the rest of the team in terms of raw damage dealing and or damage absorption. If the leader is well-rounded in terms of overall skill, the big guy will probably be stronger than him. Conversely, if the leader's main thing is being insanely competent or good in a fight, the big guy will probably be almost as good. Or if the leader's thing is just being super strong, the big guy will basically just be a damage sponge. If the big guy is male, he's usually going to be physically big, or at least tall, but if she's female, she'll probably just be insanely tough and maybe tall. Beyond that, their character is largely undefined. Some big guys are really nice, gentle giants, some aren't. Most big guys are super loyal and good friends with the rest of the team. If the writer wants to give some member of the team a quirky trait that's not directly relevant to anything, it's pretty safe to give it to the big guy. Maybe he'll be an expert cook or only communicate in incomprehensible roaring noises. You got a lot of leeway on this one. And last, but usually not least, we have the smart guy, where the big guy mostly plays the role of being bigger than everyone else on the team, physically or metaphorically. The smart guy plays the equally specialized role of being smarter than everyone on the team. If they need a plan, the smart guy is probably going to be the one to put it together. If they need some exposition, the smart guy will know just what to say. Generally, the smart guy will be pretty abysmal in a straight fight, but luckily he's rarely going to find himself in a straight fight. In a sci-fi setting, he's probably a tech genius or roboticist, or just an actual robot, in which case he probably will be good in a fight. In fantasy, he is guaranteed to be a mage. He might not be able to throw a punch, but that's usually what the rest of the team is for. In some circumstances, usually anime, the smart guy actually can fight, but has almost no raw power, and instead will have to carefully devise a strategy in order to win with what abilities and equipment he has. In stories where the leader has a well-rounded skill set and occasionally devises cunning strategies on his own, the smart guy is the one who will figure out what he's doing and handily explain it to the rest of the team, demonstrating both the leader's intelligence and his own. Also, the smart guy can totally be a girl, but if she is, she'll probably be
missing!
more
I can't find it!
Than the Heart. Plus, if you want to give a member of your team some kind of physical disability, the smart guy is the one most likely to get it. Mostly because the role isn't inherently as physically active as the other four, and because in a sci-fi setting, they probably build their own prosthetics. And from a neurodivergence standpoint, putting them somewhere on the spectrum, or at least implying that they might be, is fairly common, although not usually very well handled. Anyway, now of course, like all tropes,
where did it go?
If we played by these rules totally rigidly, we wouldn't actually have that many explicit five-man bands. These are general guidelines and trends, but there's always room
Wait,
for maneuver. For one thing,
was
five-man
right
bands
above it.
routinely
Why?
have additional support members. The Sixth Ranger is the trope name for an additional team member, and the tag-along kid is the trope for the inexplicably untraumatized child character that frequently joins the party. Mentor characters can also sometimes attach themselves to the group, and of course sometimes you end up with hybridized tropes in the character roles. Sometimes the big guy also fills the role of the Heart, or the Lancer is also the idea guy, or the smart guy fills a non-combat leadership role, or the team leader isn't the hero, but one of the other four is. While they don't count as five-man bands, you can have groups of 3 or 4 central characters that collectively fill all the tropes of the five-man band, just reshuffled to fit into fewer characters. To give an example of how the five-man band can be remixed slightly without losing major dynamics, let's break out the old broken record and take a quick glance at the new Voltron again. Now this looks like it'd be perfect five-man band material. There are 5 paladins with 2 support characters, those being a princess and a quirky mentor. Of the paladins, Shiro's the leader, Keith is his lancer and right-hand man, and Hunk is indisputably the big guy with Pidge as the smart guy. But Princess Allura fills the role of the Heart, despite the fact that the major five-man band in the story doesn't actually include her. She's one of the support characters. Instead, the five-man band has Lance, who doesn't clearly fall into any of the five-man band tropes. If anything, he's kind of a lancer to Keith, who is himself a lancer. This is because in the original show, the leader Shiro dies, and Keith replaces him as team leader with Lance as his lancer. So until that happens, Lance is basically a lancer's lancer. That was hard to say. But the bottom line is, even though these 5 are the major character descriptors for a five-man band, there's plenty of room for leeway without losing the fundamental five-man bandiness. Although, be warned, TV Tropes is very explicit about only using examples that are exactly the textbook definition of the trope, with no character hybridizations allowed. I'm playing with a looser definition here because rules are dumb. Now, before we go any further, now that we've got some sense for what the trope is made of, we gotta talk about where the trope as a whole comes from. There are two major sources for the five-man band, the Mahabharata and the Journey to the West. Frustratingly, neither one actually correlates perfectly to the modern
I'm not
concept of a five-man band,
entirely
but that's just 'cause
sure
tropes naturally evolve over time. In the
what
Mahabharata, we've
exact.
got
I'm gonna have to
Yudhishthira and
look
Lucius
into
as
this.
smart
I don't
guys,
really feel like
Arjuna
doing
and
it
Lancer in
right
the
now.
powerhouse role, Bhima as the classic big guy, the twins as support,
'Cause,
and
like-
Krishna as a semi-omnipotent sixth ranger. You've also got Draupadi
What?
playing the role of the heart. In Journey
Heck.
to the West, meanwhile, we've got Tripitaka as the heart, Monkey
Wait.
as the leader, Pigsy as the lancer, Sandy as the big guy, and, well, the horse is barely present, so he kinda doesn't fit, and funnily enough, the role of smart guy is conspicuously absent to the surprise of precisely nobody. But here's something fun that specifically came from the Journey to the West. In Chinese mythology, there are
Yeah,
five
I'm just gonna
elements:
have to
metal,
look
which is
look
also
through
made
it.
of wood, earth, fire, and water.
I need to like
These
hunt for like
elements
the
interact in
perimeter
very
that's like
specific
messing with
ways,
this, and I
each
don't feel like
element
doing it
supporting one
right
and
now.
complementing another. Each character in the Journey to
Tired.
the West is specifically affiliated with an element. Sandy is metal, Pigsy is wood, Tripitaka is earth, which, funnily enough, is itself associated with the heart, fitting his party role. The dragon horse is water, and Monkey is, surprise surprise, fire. Now these five elements, or parts of them at least, show up a lot in five-man bands, but what role each element corresponds to is not static. The original Sailor Scouts are pretty much a textbook five-man band, but in that case, water corresponds to Mercury, who's the smart guy, and fire goes to Mars, who's the lancer. And in all of their incarnations, the Power Rangers have generally
Alright.
had the Red Ranger to be the leader, with fire as his element. The big guy is almost always
I'm going to take a break because this is a couple of things that I need to look into for this and get a response from the client before I can do anything else. Cause like it's just like I don't know how else to explain it. It's just a bit odd. It's just a bit odd. I'm gonna go take a nap because I'm tired as hell, and I will send you guys someone else's way. I already know who I'm going to raid. We're going to go raid Mint because she's an absolute freaking sweetheart. I know she will take good care of you guys, but I hope you guys had a great time hanging out with me during stream. I know it's a short stream. I'm just really freaking tired right now, and this model is actually really stressful to work on, which I'm not overly too surprised about. I knew it was gonna be stressful to work on because of like how like messy it was and stuff, and how many parameters and stuff it has. It's just like staring at it for a long period of time is really freaking hard. But I do hope that you guys have a great rest of your days. Next time I'll be streaming on Friday. I'll be playing more Ender Lilies. Oh my god, it's so loud. Hi Mana, I hope you're doing well. But yeah, I'll see you guys again soon though. Thank you all for stopping by. I appreciate. Hope you have a good rest of your insert time here, and I'll see you guys again later. We're rating Mint. Mint will take good care of you guys. Give her love. She's a really cool baker bread lady, and I love her. Anyways, yes. Bye bye. See you guys again later. Thank you.